Hello everybody, it's my pleasure to be with you again, and today we are in Reimagine Church, and I'm so blessed to talk with you, Pastor Robert Tanner and Julie. Welcome for this program, and thank you that you are welcoming us here in your church. If you can say in a few words who you are, what are you doing, just introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Julie, married to Robert Tanner. We are pastors of Reimagine here in Utica, New York. We've been here 4 years in August, right? Yep, we came August 25th, and we started in September of 2019. Mm-hmm. We have 4 children and 4 grandchildren, and we're just happy to be here with you today.
Lots of force in your family.
Yes.
Foursquare church.
Foursquare children. That's cool, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, a repetitive number.
Yeah, I had 4 siblings in my family. He had 4 siblings in his.
Wow.
Yeah.
What else with number 4?
Well, between the two of us, we have 4 parents. No, I'm just... My name is Robert Tanner, and I'm the senior pastor here at Reimagine Church. And outside of the most important thing, being a son of Lord God Almighty, I'd say the next identifier that I identify with is I get the pleasure of being married to this woman here. So
you already said that you are here in Utica, New York. I know that it's mysterious way how you came back to Utica. If you can share about this, please.
Well, I left Utica in, I think it was September of 1984. And I left saying I had no intention to ever be a pastor. So I would have told people, because my dad was the one who started this church. Mm-hmm. And so I told people at the time I would never be a pastor. And then when I left Utica, I said I will never live in Utica, New York again.
Never say never.
Never say never, right? I think when we do that, it's a direct challenge to the Lord, and he just laughs and goes, okay. Okay. And yes, exactly. So now I tell people I'm never going to be rich, and I'm never going to live in Hawaii. All right? Yeah. Except for then the Lord says, now I've given you the gift of prophecy. You're right. You're never going to be having those 2 things on. But no, I left, I said I think it was actually in September of 1984, and went down to Texas, and I was down there for quite a while. And long story short, fast forward, by 2018, we were in Iowa at the time, trying to do work there that it wasn't taking off. Nothing was happening. And we talked to some other people within the district, supervisor. We talked to some pastors that are family of ours and counselors, and everybody said, yeah, your time there is probably done. So I reached out to the denomination that we're part of, which is the International Church of the Foursquare Gospel. And I said, hey, I'm in Iowa City, but I'm willing and able to go wherever I'm needed. And they responded within a couple of days and said, we'd like to talk to you. And so we made an appointment to talk on a Tuesday the following week. And this gentleman by the name of Tim May called me from the district offices, and he said, I'm looking at your resume. You've lived in California and Texas and Iowa, but this is the East Coast is very different. You've never lived in New England. And of course, I'm in my mind saying, well, yes, I have. And didn't say anything to him, and he said it's very different. Ministry is very hard here, and he was really just kind of letting me know that it's not an easy place. And so when he got done, I said, I have lived in New England. He said, you did? I said, yes. I said, my father actually planted and started the Foursquare Church in Utica, New York. Well, there was just this chuckle in his voice after a moment of silence, and he asked me, he said, well, how do you know what's going on in our district? And I said, well, I know about this one church, and I didn't know anything about Utica. I said, I know that there's a church open out in a community outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and told him, that I was thinking maybe that would be something I could be interested in. And he told me, so that church was available, but they already had an appointment for a pastor they were intending to make. But he said, so you don't know what else is going on in our district? And I said, no. He said, that church in Ohio was important. He said, we have 2 churches we're trying to fill right now. The one there in Ohio, and he said, the other church we're trying to fill is for a senior pastor at the Foursquare Church in Utica, New York. And that's when I said, it was my turn to go, wow, you're kidding me, And so we talked some more about it, and just kind of blown away and about that whole conversation. He said, would you be willing to take that church? And I said, well, I won't take the church as a pastor simply because my father was the one that started it, and it would be romantic to think about that. I said, I'd have to know. So we went through a season of prayer together and testing the waters. We we came here a couple of times, and too far to drive from Iowa. And we got to meet the leadership of the church, check out the church. Julie got to see the community really for the first time. And at that point, we laid a fleece out before the Lord and said, Lord, if I did, she didn't even know about it. I gave the Lord 2 signs of things that I needed to know. And within a month or 2, he fulfilled both of those signs, and we knew it was time to go. So we came here in September. We moved here. We got here on August 25th of 2019, and I took over as a pastor on I think September 9th.
But it was City Hope Church. Yes. Now it's Reimagine Church. How many times? 4 months already, or no? The
legal name of the church is Utica Foursquare Church. That's the legal name according to the IRS and the Secretary of State's office. Somewhere around 2010, the people who were at the church decided they wanted a slogan name, and they named the church City Hope Fellowship Church. And then this last year, I think it was the beginning of January, we officially changed the name to Reimagine Church.
Why Reimagine, if you very shortly can say?
There's actually a number of reasons why you would do that have to do with communication, practicality, that sort of thing, and trending, if you will. The reason why, I think what you're asking me is why did we pick the name Reimagine? Right. Pastoring for the years that I have, and especially coming here to this area, we've really noticed that a lot of people have an opinion of the church. Okay, what a church is, and sometimes their opinion of Christianity in the church is based off of maybe something they've seen in a movie, and we know Hollywood portrays Christianity real well, right? Or something they read in a book of somebody that's anti-Christian, or they know somebody who was a Christian but was a bad influence, so they portray that on the church. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are not going to church anymore because they would have been what I would call over-churched. They've been in churches that they were all form and tradition. They were taught just strict regulations and nothing about the spiritual freedom that we have. So they have a bad view of what the church is. And so this actually kind of came up originally. It wasn't on purpose. We went out to change the name. It was myself and another pastor here at the church. We're having a conversation, and we were starting this not a program, but more of a campaign, if you will, called, matter of fact, you'll see on our banners, it's called Reimagine the Church. And we're trying to get people to do just that, for just a moment in their mind to reimagine what the church is. Maybe it's not the church that you have bad experience in. Maybe the church isn't full of people like that one person that you knew. Maybe the church, just maybe, is not what Hollywood makes it out to be. So what we're asking people to do is whatever your image is, just set it aside for a minute and just give us 5 minutes to help you re-image what the body of Christ is about. So that was the purpose behind it. And as we shared with the people in the church, I actually gave them this example. I said, you might be talking to somebody one day, and they're going to ask you, where do you're going to say something about going to church or make reference to it. It's just going to be a natural conversation, and you might say, well, I go to Reimagine Church. Most likely, that's going to make them ask, reimagine. What do you mean reimagine?
Yeah, exactly.
That just opened the door for you to share your testimony. Invite somebody to church. So it's going to start the conversation. So we gave them that example. Well, there was a young man at the church that day. He goes home. He has a roommate who's unsaved and a girlfriend who's an atheist, doesn't want anything to do with Christians at all. And he said something about Reimagine Church. Well, this atheist young lady said just that. She does that. She goes, well, what's a Reimagine Church? Right. And so he explained it to her. Her immediate response is, she said, I like that. It doesn't sound churchy. And that's exactly what we were looking for. They actually wound up coming and visiting, and they enjoyed it. Now, she is not saved yet, but she got to experience exactly what we were talking about. Maybe the church isn't what you thought it was. And so hence, Reimagine Church.
It's a very beautiful picture. Both of you are, you almost pastor, correct?
Yeah,
and you are husband and wife, how you met each other. Because in your past, it was not very ideal, how we can see now. If you can share a little bit about that.
I was just a jerk. That's all there is to it. I was a jerk. Okay, story over. No, I was raised, with my dad being a pastor, and my parents were great pastors. They were great people, but ministry in their mind, in their generation, came before everything. Okay, even before the family. I think what happened is growing up, I developed this resentment, this feeling of being left out. So when I got older, and I turned 18, 19, I wasn't against God. God was a good guy. Okay, that was my attitude. Okay, but I thought, I need to go live my life. I need to get my career going, make money, get married, have kids, and then later on, when all that stuff is in order, then I'll do my thing with God. Of course, we clearly know that it just doesn't work that way. So I left here in 1984. I went down south to Texas, and I became bodyguard for Ross Perot at that time. And of course, I don't know if you know who Ross Perot is, but he eventually ran for the presidency of the United States. He didn't win, but he was one of the wealthiest men in America. And from there, I went into law enforcement, and I was a police officer in the Dallas, Texas area. But I was just living my life, working my way up through the ranks, and night shift commander, and I was actually a sniper on the tactical team, but I was living my life for myself. Finally, there's a police officer, and at the time I was getting out of law enforcement. During that time, I had actually been married and divorced twice. It was through that experience where I involuntarily even stepped out of law enforcement, and people were shocked that knew me, because even the police department, the chief was trying to talk me out of it. They're like, you've invested your whole youth preparing for this, and you've worked your way up into command, and how do you just walk away from that? Well, I did. But through that process of leaving law enforcement and going through the divorces, I actually got to where I was starting to think about suicide. Didn't feel like I had a reason to live, right? So there was... Depression. Yeah. My world came crashing down because, as a police officer, I had status. Well, status was gone. And then going through 2 divorces, that helps you take a real big financial hit. And then one of my ex-wives decided she was leaving Texas and taking our 2 daughters with them, and it was with her, and it was like, wow. It's like my whole world was just over with. But there was one night, it was on December the 4th of 1996, I sat on the hood of my car outside of somebody's house who I was supposed to be meeting, and they didn't show up. And it was like, wow. And I just started crying. I was like, but what am I going to do? The only reason why I probably hadn't committed suicide was because I had given my gun away. I'd sold it to a friend. Didn't have it. So I just looked up. I said, God, if you exist, you need to show up, and you need to prove it to me now. Well, as soon as I said that, a peace kind of came over me. The crying stopped, and I was like, got my breath back again, got in my car, and went home. Well, the next day, I drove by a church that I'd driven by. It was probably a quarter mile from the apartment I was living in. I had driven by over that 20 years, I don't know, thousands of times. But they had a marquee on the outside, a big sign. And it said, we are a Bible-preaching, Spirit-filled church. Well, I recognized the term Spirit-filled, but I didn't know what that meant. I meant, my dad used to use that term. Yeah. So I thought, okay, well, maybe church is what I need. I think this is a Wednesday, if I remember right. So I see one car sitting in the parking lot. And I thought, well, I'm gonna go in, before I go to church on Sunday, I'm gonna go find out what they believe. I don't want to walk in and find out these are a bunch of Hare Krishnas or Buddhists or something. So I walked up to the door, and it was locked. It was a glass door with a doorbell, and I rang it, and this man came walking down the hallway. Well, which I thought was the janitor, because he was in jeans and a dirty T-shirt and didn't look like a pastor. Turned out to be it was a pastor. So he opens the door and asked me what I need. I said, do you have any brochures or pamphlets or anything about what you believe? And he looked at me kind of confused, and he said, well, why don't you step on inside? And so I did. I stepped inside. He just asked me one question. He goes, he just asked me a little bit about myself, and he just listened. And then he asked me, he said, you're hurting inside, aren't you? I said, more than you'll ever know. And I just started bawling again. So at this point, he reaches out his hand. He goes, hi, I'm Pastor Ray Galligan. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh no, I was talking to the pastor. Now I'm going to get a sermon, right? And so he walks me down to his office, and we sat down, and he just pulls up and he opens his Bible, the book of Romans, and starts talking to me about what it means to be saved. And he said, are you a believer? And I was like, yeah, I believe. He goes, okay. He said, how do you know? And I thought for a minute, and I literally looked at him. I said, I can't even define it. I said, maybe I'm not. He goes, do you want to be? I said, sure. Mm-hmm. So he comes around his desk, sitting next to me, put his hand on me, and prayed for me. And immediately, all the anxiety, all the depression, all the fear of everything was just gone. I felt like I was it was one of those, wow, The skies opened up. Wow. The birds started flying. I mean, it's like, yeah, the flowers started to bloom. You know, just life was totally different for me at that time. And I realized most people that I've talked to don't have that experience. I know a lot of people that have, but that was the start of my journey right there. And so it was a long journey.
I remember you said that when you became Christian, when you came back like a prodigal son to Christ again, you became homeless. Is it at that moment, or? It's
the story behind it, because I said I'd left law enforcement and just gone through a divorce, and I wound up with all the bills. Some people would say, you know, she got the elevator going up and I got the shaft coming down, right? And basically, I didn't file for bankruptcy, but it bankrupted me. I lost everything. So it was after I had gotten saved. My parents had left here by that time. They were back in California. And I thought, well, maybe I need to live closer to family, because I didn't have any other family in Texas at that time. But I did not want to live in California. So I went to Reno, Nevada, because there was a Foursquare church there who the pastor used to be a Los Angeles police officer. And I found out about him, talked to him, said all kinds of jobs in Reno. And I said, okay, so I'll go ahead and go there. Turned out to be I went to that church and was not impressed with the church. Wasn't impressed with the pastor. And so I was there in Reno trying to work, finding really low-paying jobs. And finally, I just didn't have anything. So I had any place to live. I had to move out of the apartment. So I had everything I could pack. And it was, I think, a 1984 Buick Regal. Okay, I had it packed in the trunk, had it in the back seat, and never had to sleep in the car. But it seems like I always knew somebody who could give me, let me stay at their place for a couple weeks or a week and that sort of thing. So that went on for a few months until April of 1998. And the reason why I remember that is because I decided at that point I was going to move to California the first week of May of 1998 and live with my parents. I just stayed at their house, try to find work there. Well, my father died the week beforehand. That was unexpected. I went to California for the funeral, went back to Reno, picked up my stuff, put it in the car, went back, and I wound up sleeping on my mother's couch for about the first 18 months while I was getting my life going again. But it was during that time that the Lord was doing a lot, because you need to understand, I'm a police officer. I was in command, police department. Had a very successful career. And now I'm working for my niece at a local movie theater at minimum wage, threading movie reels upstairs in the attic. Yeah. Oh, very humbling. But the Lord had to show me that my identity was in Him, and not what I was doing.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. Julie, how you came to Christ?
So my story is completely different. Of course.
Yeah, she was the angel.
Jerking angels.
I grew up in the church. My dad, of course, was a pastor for the first while. And when I was about 7 years old, my brother and I, he was 6, I was 7, we were watching The Waltons. It's an old show that used to be on. And they started talking about death, and Grandpa Walton was going to die. And so when we shut off the TV, my brother and I were sitting there, and we looked at my dad, and I said, well, what's going to happen if he dies? And so my dad, basically at that point, in understanding in the terms of a 7-year-old and a 6-year-old's minds, what does that mean, and who is Jesus, and what happens after you die, and would you like to receive him? And of course, my brother and I said yes, and that's when I received Jesus. But my real maturing and the real depth of my relationship with the Lord came when I went through my divorce. I was married, and my first husband was also a pastor's kid. But he decided to cheat on me. And when he did, I was pregnant with my son. And so it was very devastating. That's when the Lord really just showed up big time for me in so many practical ways, emotionally, financially. I just remember one time specifically when I was crying and just desperate, and I cried out to the Lord, and I said, Lord, I need you, I need something. And the phone rang. And it was my dad. And he was saying, Julie, how are you? And I said, Dad, I'm not doing good. And that was totally the Lord just showing up for me through my dad, who I'm very close to. He unfortunately just passed away in March, but he's with the Lord. But my dad was a very wonderful, loving, caring, godly man who made it easy for me to understand the Father heart of God. And I'm very, very grateful for that. But all that to say, my story was very different from Robert's. But, not to say I was perfect, because I wasn't. And I had to come to those places and still to do to this day to, choose to follow the Lord and choose to obey him and choose to live in an authentic, real way before him. And so it's always a journey, But it was cool because when the Lord brought us together, it was pretty amazing and miraculous because I'd gone through the divorce. I had my baby son at the time, and my parents lived in Southern California, and I lived in Fresno, which is the central part of California. Well, they prayed about it, and they moved because I was a single mom now with with my son. They moved from Southern California up to Fresno, and I lived with them when my son was a baby up until I met Robert, and it was about a 2.5 years. From the time that I moved in with my parents till I met and married Robert. And so the process was quite amazing because my family was very protective of me, and so they wanted to make sure this guy was okay. But the cool thing was that Robert didn't know who I was. He had met with my dad because he was interested in ministry. And my last name was different, of course, than my dad's last name. And so my dad got to sit down with Robert and get to know him really well before he and I met and started dating. So my dad had full knowledge of his background, what the Lord had done in his life. So it was a protection and a covering for me as we walked together into this. And because we had such similar backgrounds, both of our dads were pastors in Foursquare. They came out of denominations that did not believe in the gifts and the power of the Holy Spirit. They both had transformation happen and received the gifts and the power and the filling of the Holy Spirit. And when they did, both their denominations said, yeah, no thank you, go somewhere else. And they both entered into Foursquare, the denomination we're part of now, because we believe in all those things. So when we met and we started talking to each other like every night for hours, so what do you believe about this? What do you believe about that? And so we agreed on everything, and that was so important to us to establish, because before anything, we had to know that we believed the same way. So, because that can be such a tension in marriage when you don't, if you're not in the same path, on the same path, and understand who God is,
Yeah, so both of you've gone through divorces, and now you have like one strong family. How do you build your family? Do you have certain principles that you just maintain every day, or like just to have successful family?
Yeah, mom's always right.
Yeah, what is the main rule? Yeah. I think when you're establishing a second marriage, or if you've been married before and you're blending a family, one of the most important things is to be on the same page with your children. And you go together as a united front, and you decide ahead of time, because the children are already feeling insecure, so they need to feel secure. And so we did a lot of talking about how we would make decisions and what we would do. And when we got married at our wedding ceremony, we did vows to our children. I did vows to his children, which he has 3, and he did a vow to my son. So because it's about a covenant, not just between a husband and a wife, but between the family, because we intend to be married until we die. So this is our forever family. And so that was one of the things that we established right from the beginning. And also the kids still needed to know that mom and dad it's the Lord first, mom and dad, then the kids. So our relationship is gotta be in line and doing well for us to be able to bless our children. And so they had to see that, even though we weren't from the same biological families, that we were one now. Right. And we would function as if we were only married to each other, and that these were our fully biological kids. So we treated them all the same. We loved them all the same. And that created security.
Yeah, we've never used the term stepchildren. Okay. Lucas, her biological son, he's my son. I've never told anybody he's my stepson, unless we've had to, for medical purposes, he's not my biological son, that sort of thing, to clarify that. And if there was, something legal that had to be done, that sort of thing. But outside of that, I tell people he's my son. But yeah, I think for blending a family, and so many, unfortunately, so many believers have got really things out of priority. We agree, most of us do, that the Lord is number one. The Lord is a first in my life, then Julie, then our kids. So many parents put their kids
then ministry.
And then ministry.
and then ministry.
Yes.
Listen,
You even distinguish, I mean, that husband and wife and then children. So it's not like Lord, family, ministry, but Lord, husband and wife, children, and then ministry.
Yes.
listen. The Bible tells the married couple, it tells the men, and it applies really to women as well, to leave. You leave the parents, and you cleave to each other. There is no leaving and cleaving to children. And what I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding is that eventually your children are always going to be your children. But when they're growing up, there's an obedience thing that has to happen. But when your children are fully grown, while they're biologically your children, they become more your peers. So that relationship changes. I don't get to tell my grown children what to do anymore. I expect them to honor me, but at that point, they don't have to obey me. Okay? And the relationship changes. My son should leave and cleave to his wife. This is the one that is established in heaven. It's the covenant relationship between us and the Lord. There's not a covenant relationship between the two of us and our children. So the children need to understand, and that helps to reinforce when you're blending families, because the children will try to play the parents against each other, especially if they know it. So when we disagreed, we didn't disagree in front of the children. We went in the other room, figured out what our answer is going to be, and then when we came back to the children never saw any daylight between us. We didn't think we were doing well at this until my daughter, who when she was older, she was in her late 20s, she was complaining one time about how Julie basically called the shots when she was growing up in the house. And we started laughing. And it was like, I had to tell her, sweetie, that was my idea. That came from me. She goes, I thought it was Julie. It's like, no, that came from me, which told me she understood. You know, Julie did. She knew I've got her back. So the kids, they thought it was coming from her. No, we were so united. They couldn't tell where the rules were coming from. But that relationship, the marriage relationship, has to come before the children. And I know some people struggle and they go, well gosh, my children aren't going to think that I love them as much. Just the opposite is true. They are learning because you are mirroring for them what a healthy marriages look like. So guess what happens when they get out of the house and they get married? Guess who they're going to honor the way they're supposed to? And hopefully their families won't get divorced because the marriage is important.
I like this idea. It's so powerful and important. Do you have certain traditions, family traditions that you really want to follow?
Well, not to sound overly spiritual or religious, but I'm really hoping the legacy that we leave behind.
I think the biggest thing for me, and what my oldest daughter did say to me eventually, was she said, Julie, she never really called me mom because she was 15 and a half when we started dating and had turned 16 when we got married. But she said, you are the same person at home as you are when we're out and when you're at church. And that to me spoke volumes because I didn't want to be a different person at home and put on a different face out in the public or out in church that looked different. I wanted to be authentically who I was at home and authentically who God created me to be at church. And that speaks volumes because I think in ministry families, because you see the reality of each other in your home, you can see some imbalance or differences when somebody is out in their public face as opposed to their private face. And so sometimes pastors' kids see that differentiation and it's hard for them because we are human and we're not perfect and there are going to be times where we're not, we do things at home that we would not do in public, but generally speaking, who I was at home was who I was out in the public and out at church. And so that was huge because that was my goal for my children, because my parents modeled the same thing for me, and I didn't have that issue where I didn't have to say, well, Daddy is this way when he's the pastor, but he's not this way at home. My dad was who he was at home also. Again, he created a good example for me, and I didn't want to be an issue. I didn't want to be in the way of my children getting to know who God really is through my example.
I really want you to talk about Sabbath. I like this topic, and when we talked with you before, I was just like, wow, I really want to implement this in our family because we need this. We are not human doing, a human being. If you can just talk about that a little bit.
Real easy. Go to YouTube and watch my message 2 weeks ago.
Just in a few words, like what it is and why this is important.
Well, let me answer it this way. Keeping the Sabbath is one of the 10 Commandments. In the example I gave a couple of weeks ago is if you and I were sitting here talking, or any other group of Christians, you can ask them, do we believe the first commandment, that God is the only God, the one and only, or it's Him, He's first? We'd say yes to that. And do we believe that we shouldn't have any other gods before Him? There's no idolatry. He's just Him. We don't worship anything else. Yes, we'd agree with that. And then, of course, don't use His name in vain. And then the fourth one, of course, has to do with the Sabbath. And then there's the honoring your mother and father, and then thou shalt not murder. And we'd sit. I would agree. We all sit there and say, yes, we shouldn't do those things. And we shouldn't lie. We shouldn't steal. We shouldn't covet. We shouldn't commit adultery. And everybody sit there and say yes. But that fourth commandment, people seem to think it's the one commandment we don't have to obey. But yet it's one of the commandments that has a death penalty with it if you don't keep it. Why is it we believe we should keep all 9 of the other commandments?
Again, fourth commandment. It's something miraculous with number 4.
Number 4, there you go, there you go. All right, so,
wow.
Exactly. Hopefully this doesn't go 4 hours, but no. For some again, people seem to think, well, I haven't got to keep that commandment. And it's, well, why do you feel that you don't have to keep that one? And I've heard people say, well, that's the Old Testament. So is thou shalt not commit murder. Are you telling me because that's in the Old Testament that it's okay to commit murder? Well, of course it's not. Okay, so we excuse that away. And I think the reason why we do that, it's almost like the reason why people don't tithe as they should. They believe that they are their own provider. So they don't take the Sabbath either because they believe they have to work harder to be their own provider. And as believers, we should understand we are not our own provider. God is our provider.
Yeah.
He's our source. That gift there of the Sabbath, God could have created just 6 days and started the whole cycle all over again. 6 days, start over. He didn't. Why did He create the 7th day? He took a breath. That's literally what it means. What had He been doing for 6 days? He'd been speaking. Mm-hmm. And when God creates, He's not waving His hand and saying this. He just speaks, and His breath creates. That Sabbath, which says God rested, it literally means He did this. He took a breath. And we need to do the same thing. We need to take a breath. Yes. So while in the Old Testament, not keeping the Sabbath had the death penalty, what's our parallel today? Well, simple. You might be working yourself to death. And God wants you to take a break. Yeah. Yes. Well, you need to take that break. And so for me, I don't get the Sabbath on Sunday. My Sunday starts at 5 in the morning, goes about 1 in the afternoon. I work on Sundays. That's my job. So on Fridays, we take our Sabbath.
What do you do on Fridays?
I don't answer emails. I don't study my sermon notes. I don't write sermons. I don't answer phone calls. I try not to think about the church at all. Okay? I don't do anything work-related. That's our day. We are very, very strict with it. We've taught the church, the leadership.
The church has been very respectful because they had to learn. And now if there's an actual emergency, we're sorry to interrupt you on your Sabbath, so they know it's our Sabbath. So the fun thing is we just get up in the morning, we get our coffee, we sit there, and we look at each other. What do you want to do today? And it's kind of like whatever we feel like doing. As an adult, obviously, every other day of the week it's not how I feel, it's what I have to do, because we're adults and we have all these things and routines. But it's like, I don't know, what's the weather going to be like? Should we go on a trail? We love being outside and in the mountains. I don't cook that day at all. No cooking. I don't even like cooking, so.
And I don't mow the yard.
Yeah, there's no work whatsoever. So it's just he and I, and we get to reconnect, we get to reestablish. If we do talk about the church, we kind of keep it real small, and then we'll be like, okay, let's move on now.
Change the channel.
And let's talk about us and our family and our lives and our passions and our future and whatever the Lord is saying to us. We get refreshed. We get to spend more time sometimes just with Him in the quiet. So it's just really, I look forward to my Fridays, to my Sabbath, because it's refreshing and it gives me something to say, okay, I'm working really hard now, but because God rested, that means I can rest too and be okay. He gave me permission. In fact, He didn't just give me permission, He said, do it. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to obey Him. If I'm going to obey all these other things, I'm going to obey Him in this. And He knows He created it for us. I mean, think about it. He created the Sabbath for us. He didn't have to rest. He's God. He just could have kept going, but he took a break, so I get to take a break.
Listen, slaves don't get a day off.
We're not slaves.
We're not slaves. We're sons and daughters.
That's right.
The king gets a day off, and so do his kids. Unfortunate, but there are so many pastors that I know in ministry leaders that won't take a Sabbath. And they will use the church and ministry as their reason. They'll say, I've got to do ministry. There's unsaved people out there. Well, I got news for you. There's forever going to be unsaved people out there, and you can't reach them all. But something else that is part of ministry is Sabbathing. And if you don't take it as a pastor, if you don't show that example to your people, you will eventually burn out everybody in ministry who's serving under you and with you. Is to the degree of health that there is for the leadership, is the degree of health that people out here are going to have. Yeah. They are not going to be stronger in this area if you're not leading it that way. Yeah. You can't live one way and expect people to learn to follow basically a very simple principle. It's a free gift. It's a free gift. Why would we not take that gift of Sabbath? I just don't get that. And again, some people are killing themselves because they won't receive a free gift. And they burn themselves out in their ministry and everybody else who serves with them. And I think that's one of the things I probably saw as a kid growing up. My dad didn't Sabbath. There was always something that had to be done. Well, there's always going to be. Always. But that's the Lord's job to figure that out.
And that is trusting God, because we're not the ones that are ultimately in charge. If for one day we don't do something ministry related, God's still going to get his job done. It's his job. We just partner with him, and he knows that he created this so that we can last for a long time in ministry. We want to end well. We don't just want to start and then burn out. We want to end well. So it's a long obedience in the same direction, endurance and perseverance. And for that, you need to have rest.
And I think this is one of the reasons why we see so ministry people, their children not following into ministry. And a lot of pastors' kids become heathens, like I did, okay? Here's the reason why, is because they haven't been taught and raised up that way. And really what they've learned is, ministry is more important than me. And that puts it out of place. Yeah. So it puts those children in a place where they're resistant to follow the lead of their parents and take the gospel. Remember I told you, I was never going to become a pastor, okay? And I was never going to come back to Utica. Well, it's not because my parents were bad people, but they hadn't shown something that was healthy for me to be able to receive and understand I had value as my father's son.
Yes. Just like God.
And my earthly father is a representation of my heavenly father on earth.
Right.
Okay. And if I don't feel like with him, like I have a level of sonship and importanteship, why would I think I've got it with him? See, there's so many other consequences that are important. Yeah. Okay. And the Lord honors that. The Lord honors that. He's quite capable of doing anything he wants to do. He will get his work accomplished. Yeah. But he wants us to have our identity in who he is before the work that we do. Right. Because if we're doing work outside of who we're created to be, then we're human beings, not human doings. Right. And I haven't got to work to save the kingdom. Yeah. I do the part that the Lord gave me to do. And I have relationship first.
Yeah. And one thing that the Lord really had to show me over my lifetime as being a pastor's kid also was that I wasn't just part of the crowd. My relationship with the Lord was individualistic. And he very much cares about the details of my life. But I was always part of just this group, this crowd, of people. And that's where the Lord really had to take me to those deeper places to show me that I mattered to him. Because for a long time I just, was just part of the group. I'm just part of church. I'm just not important. And when the enemy can lie to us like that, when we think we don't have value or worth, then he can keep us defeated and out of the calling and the purpose and the passion that he has for our lives. And so that's the lie I was believing. And I felt inadequate and insecure, so I wasn't going to step out in authority because I didn't feel like I had the backing because I was just one of the crowd. But when I had the backing of who God was and he had shown me who I was in his eyes, then it gave me the power and the authority to step forward. Like, just the whole thing of me even becoming a pastor is really miraculous, because I didn't even want to be a pastor's wife. And so God really had to work on me over the years and speak to me about who I was and the calling He's put on my life. And for me to step out into that has been really scary and really something I've had to learn to trust the Lord. And I'm just now stepping into this. I'm starting the courses to get licensed with Foursquare as a pastor. So it's been a life process, and it's really miraculous that I'm even wanting to do this. It's totally God.
I'm receiving right now just revelations from God personally for me, and I believe that people who are watching, if you can explain your personal growth, because you're all the time with people, you help others. What do you do to maintain your personal growth? Do you just read Bible, read some books, pray every day? Like, what do you do? How it looks like as a routine?
For me, I read the Bible daily. I don't do it for study. I do it for enjoyment. Study has to do when I'm studying for sermons or to teach something. But the daily reading, as a matter of fact, I've started reading more and more of the Message Bible just for enjoyment, because I like the way it shares a lot of stuff, okay, and just kind of makes it more simple, if you will. I won't use the Message Bible when I'm studying theology, but it's my enjoyment. I read a lot of books. A lot of different authors, different topics within Christianity, some on theology, some on just life, the reality of living. And of course, these are all Christian authors. But I also have a group of people, men in my life, Julie's father was one, but like she said, he just passed away. She also has a brother that pastors in Southern California. I reach out to him on how to, what for kind of questions. Sometimes, what was your experience when you had this? But I have many other pastors.
That you are accountable?
They're friends. I'm not accountable to them. These are relationships. Some of them are outside of the Foursquare denomination. There's a mega church down in Texas that we are tightly relationship with, and I have a whole resource of pastors and people to draw from down there as well. Matter of fact, at Christmas time, I called one of them. I said, I'm really struggling with something here, and I thought, this is bad. And I called him and talked to him, and he's like, no, he said, I've completely struggled with that same thing myself. He basically said, you're just under attack right now. It helps to bring things back in. We realize, okay, I'm not a bad pastor. Mm-hmm. It's an outside influence that's coming against me. So I do have that. Now in our denomination, I have pastors that I am subject to. Okay, and so I can't just run off and do my own thing. The other thing that I do is I try to be as transparent about everything I can. If I'm struggling, if I'm having a bad day, if I had a bad thought about something, just bitter about to somebody, that sort of thing. I have people right here. Well, Julie's one of them. The other pastor that's here, he and I talk a lot. I try not to hide things with people. Try to let them know, hey, I put my pants on just like you do, one leg at a time, and I have the same struggles. Hopefully, that encourages other people, but it's kind of funny because sometimes you'll get the answer you need or the encouragement that you need from somebody who you least expect. So yeah, I do. I have people, some that I'm accountable to. It has mainly to do with polity and structure, but some of the other people that I'm accountable to are just friends who aren't they aren't in vocational ministry, but they have ministries. Like we have a couple that are friends of ours that they are continue to develop a marriage ministry. And so they're a wealth of information. So we've done some stuff with them. Yeah, there's times that we'd say, hey, let's get some counseling for something here.
You're open to learn.
Oh, yes. He's a lifelong learner for sure. And so am I.
If you're trying to hide something, you're just not going to get healed with it. By the way, that's actually in the Bible. What's in the darkness has got to come into the light. And once it's in the light, it's exposed. It can't be hidden. Well, the enemy wants you to keep things hidden. He wants you to feel like you're the only one and nobody else understands. There's a problem. The Bible tells us there's nothing new under the sun. So everything that I'm dealing with, I know somebody else has dealt with. Yeah. So they've probably written a book about it. They've probably taught about it. They've probably lived. It's like, I've got nothing to hide. It's nothing. Listen, I have an audience of one. Everybody else is just, it's like, Lord, you put them in my life for a reason. Hopefully they can speak in my life. And if they can, I'll draw from it. If not, then I'll find somebody who I can draw from. But this day, it's really easy too. Because of social media, emails, they haven't got to be right in your own town.
Yeah.
They can be anywhere in the world. That's right.
If you can share one or two testimonies, just miracles that you've seen in your life?
I would say we were kind of chatting about this earlier, but I mean, I had an actual physical miracle when
healing?
Yeah, a healing. When I was pregnant and I miscarried my first baby. They weren't sure what was going on. They thought maybe it was an ectopic pregnancy and there was nothing happening and they were going to have to do a procedure. And I went to church and I was in the choir at the time and they prayed for me on Easter Sunday. And then the Lord just took care of it. I didn't have to have a procedure done and the baby went on to heaven. So I believe the Lord miraculously took care of that. I didn't have to go in for a procedure, which was amazing. So that was a physical thing. But I think more than anything, walking with people through their lives in ministry, partnering with people where there's been deep woundedness in the past, when there's been abuse, and seeing the transformation that happens in their lives, to me, that's just as big a miracle as a physical healing. Just as big, if not even bigger, because when you die, you get healed, but you'll eventually still die. You'll have eternal life. But when you're transformed, that goes into eternity with you. And so that's been the biggest privilege of my life. We actually have a group at our church called Mending the Soul, and it's for people that have experienced abuse in any form, spiritual, physical, emotional, sexual, narcissistic families. So walking with ladies through those healings and watching when the Lord gets a hold of their heart in those deep places, and they're never the same. And it's just the most amazing. That is what gives me the most passion, is seeing the Lord do those things. I love that part of ministry, I would say, more than anything else.
Pastor Robert, you shared that your parents were healed on Kathryn Kuhlman Ministries or something like that, right? It was miraculous and one moment healing. My
father, this is in the 60s. I was really young at the time, so I don't personally remember it. Just relaying the stories to you. My mother was healed at a Kathryn Kuhlman service after suffering from lupus erythematosus. And my father had some sort of physical disability where something was going on with his spine, his vertebra. He was kind of off balance, if you will. He had to have a special lift in some of his shoes. All of his clothing had to be special made. Like his suits had to have a certain amount of padding in the shoulders so he would look like he wasn't, crooked. He was miraculously healed there as well. Matter of fact, he wound up becoming really close friends with Kathryn Kuhlman. When she did her outreaches, she had ministers up on the platform, and he eventually, was up there on the platform with her. So she used to refer to him as my Methodist pastor. She thought that was funny. He's a Methodist pastor up here, basically in a Pentecostal environment, right? So yeah, that was a couple of healings I was aware of. Probably the most miraculous thing I ever saw, and it was under my dad's ministry, because after that happened, he sought a ministry. He asked the Lord, he wanted to have the same sort of ministry for healing and deliverance. And so as a kid, as a teenager, it wasn't in this building, but it was part of this church. There was a lady who had come in. She'd been suffering with multiple sclerosis for 17 years. And she came in, she was using a walker, but she'd push it with one hand because the other hand just was like this. She'd use her wrist, and she had to drag, I think it was on her left side, she had to drag the left foot behind her. They were Roman Catholic. She was Roman Catholic. Her husband was atheist. But she was invited to come to a service, and she got healed, and she walked out carrying that walker. And a cool story, she gets home, she opens the door, and she throws the walker in through the front door and hits her husband, who's laying on the couch sleeping. So he sits up, and she walks in perfectly healed. First thing he says, he knows where she's been, right? He goes, "This is a God I've got to meet." That was probably the most miraculous, just tremendous. But I saw so many of those things. It's just those things. Over the years, there's just been lots of it. But I have to echo what Julie said. I love to see the manifestational things. Love to see healings. I love to see when people are getting set free from demonic influence. I don't know that I agree that should always be done in a public forum. Okay, and there's reasons for that.
But do you pray for deliverance and healing?
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
Regularly?
Oh yes. Yeah. What I found is a resistance of people to actually seek prayer, which is very strange. It's like we offer people all the time to come up for prayer, and they won't do it, but they'll call during the week and say, "I can use some prayer." Well, what's going on? For 3 months. You didn't even come up for prayer when he gave you a chance. Right. Well, I didn't want people to see me walking up front. People have different reasons. But no, we absolutely do believe it. And we believe there's legitimacy to it, and we believe that's one of the things that the Lord has called us to do. I think the caution that we have to have within the body of Christ is I've noticed that there's a lot of people within the body that will go from church to church or ministry to ministry looking for an experience. They're going specifically because they want to see that manifestational thing happen. All right? And they're always talking about it. But when you start talking to them about them, there's been little to no transformation of their own life. It's like wanting to go to dinner and a show. I'm going to get fed spiritually and I want to see the show that happens afterwards. But when you talk to them about what's going on, if I ask them, what has the Lord done in your life in the last 3 years? It's crickets. Or they have to think. And to me, that's like, okay, see, you like to see people this is what Julie was hitting on, healed physically, and we definitely want to see that. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Lazarus eventually died. His body still died. These bodies are temporal. What's not temporal is the eternal us, the part that is the emotional, spiritual side of us. So to me, when I think about the miracles, when I hear that word miracles, I'm thinking about the person who's been in emotional, spiritual bondage their whole life because of things that were done to them. And they have an encounter with Jesus Christ. And suddenly the trajectory of their life, the polarity of their heart literally goes click, just like that. To me, that's eternal. If I had to take a choice, I would ask to see that all because I know I'm going to be with them, not just on this side. And they're experiencing eternity now as well. And all the benefits. Jesus came to give us life and give it to us more abundantly. First of all, he came to give us life. And then he came to give us life abundantly. That's this side of heaven. So if I can see that happen emotionally and spiritually with people, knowing I get to see him on the other side of heaven, I'll take that all day long. See, I have diabetes. Okay, I have type 2 diabetes. And I haven't got the greatest eyesight. I have to wear glasses for reading. There's things I could ask the Lord to heal me from. And I do ask. And I'm believing he's quite capable. He paid for it on the cross to make that happen. But I don't measure God's goodness on whether or not he's healing me and I'm seeing the results of that. I measure God's goodness on what I know he's doing in my heart, in my life, my thinking, the way I change my thinking. Don't be conformed to the ways of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Yeah. So my brain literally needs to be healed. All of ours does. Yeah. So when I think of miracles, that's what I think. I think transformation. Yeah. Let me see the evidence of a life that's been transformed and changed. Yeah. We see that all the time.
I just feel like all the questions that I prepared, you just covered even more, and I already received so many blessings while I just was listening to your testimonies, and it's a blessing. Thank you for your time and for that you agreed to be with us and to share your stories. May God bless you, your ministry. Thank you very much, and be blessed in Jesus' mighty name.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. This is fun. Thank you.